Today we have a crazy story of revenge on a cheating stepmom. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, my grandparents' last resort let me give my family members what they deserved. Never could have imagined that my family would treat me in the way in which they did, as I could have sworn to myself that there was nothing, absolutely nothing in the entire world that I wouldn't have given up just for their sake. And I guess they let their greed get the better of them. We had been through quite literally thick and thin together. The good days and the bad days. Most people would say that no matter what, family comes first. But the events that transpired between myself and my family made me come to the realization that even though you might put family first, it does not assure you of the notion that family puts you first. I would like to take you right back to the very beginning of how things were with me and my family from the very beginning, and how things came to be the way they are currently. I, male 32, am the second child and first son of my family. Both my parents had a total of 4 children, and each and every one of us had about a whole year and a half that set us apart. Anyways, back when I was 10, I got to realize that we, and in this case, we collectively as a family, were not as financially free as I had thought we were. And I came to this realization when I got to find out the true reason why we'd always been moving and changing neighborhoods every single year. Apparently, things due to the fact that my dear old mother couldn't keep a job, as she was what society would refer to as a Karen. Which didn't surprise me one single bit, as her name was actually Karen. Crazy, right? I know. She always was not on good terms with the bosses of her places of work, and it was usually within the span of 9 to 10 months before she lost her cool and eventually quit the job she was working. And seeing as my father alone couldn't foot the bills of our entire family, we had to move to a different neighborhood. One where she was able to get another job, where people knew virtually nothing about her. But this isn't even my concern, as I found out about this much later. Then again, it wasn't like we really needed to be this financially constrained, because I know for a fact that my grandparents from my mother's side were genuinely ready to offer both my parents their family business. But then my father, being totally driven by the every action and sayings of my mother, was too intimidated to say anything, which I found really annoying at times, but then I don't even want to blame him, as I could never have understood what was really going through his mind when, or rather while, he was doing what he was doing. As for the grandparents from my father's side, I had not the faintest idea who they were. Anyways, soon after I turned 18, my father soon mustered up the courage to stand strong on his decision to convince my mother to send me over to his parents' place. My grandparents, of which she was totally against, for the longest time too. But then, I don't even know what he did or how he did it, but then she finally gave in, and my father was able to send me on over to his parents' place. This was the first time I was going to be meeting my grandparents, seeing as we'd always been on the move, first of all, and then secondly, my mother tried as much as possible to make sure that we hardly knew anything about our grandparents. Until today, I still don't know her reasons for this. But then again, I never knew her reasons for most of the things she was doing, or rather, most of the things she did. Moving on, within the week of my mother accepting my father's suggestion, I was sent by my father to his parents' home, of which I knew not what to expect. Apparently, they knew who I was, and my father was able to afford a flight ticket for me to travel and go see them. I didn't know who was going to meet me at the airport, but I just knew that when I saw them, I would definitely know. According to my father, that is. And surely when I did get to the airport, I saw this huge placard that had my name boldly written on it in this fancy handwriting. I even got confused at some point as I couldn't yet understand what was going on. But then, a man in a black suit immediately came up to me, took my bags, and directed me to the car that would be taking me to my supposed destination. But then again, looking back now, I know for a fact that this was no ordinary car, as it definitely looked fancy and really expensive. It was something I would only see in the movies and all. I was just in a state of constant confusion as I didn't know what was going on. When I got into the car, I was greeted by 2 people whom I already assumed to be my grandparents, as they were showering me with so much love and all. It was really easy to put that together. I just couldn't understand how, or rather why, I was being treated that way. And by that way, I quite literally mean like someone that was really important, like a celebrity of sorts. I could never have believed that my father was the son of these 2 amazing people. After a while of driving, we finally got to our destination, and I must say I was even more impressed with the house than I was with the car. Apparently, I never knew this, but my grandparents were beyond wealthy. And this wasn't a result of any inherited property or assets. No, this was just simply as a result of their hard work. After I'd gotten settled down at home, my grandfather called me up into his study and began explaining things to me, as he knew that I would definitely be confused and all. This was after dinner, by the way, which was one of the most exquisite dinners I could only ever dream of. He went further to ask what my father and mother had told me about them, and when I told him that I knew virtually nothing about them, any and every information that I could have gotten on them was kept away by my mother, they said that they don't blame her, as things were more complicated than I thought. They went further to explain in detail why things were the way they were with my parents, and also why my mother was the way she was towards them. This really made me understand the reason why my mother was always against any of her children meeting the parents of our father. Apparently, as at the time my father got married to her, they were financially constrained, as their company had hit the bottom of the barrel in finances. And this was no ordinary company, but one of the then upcoming beverage companies at the time. And at the time, they were really more focused on depending greatly on my father for as little financial assistance as possible. But this didn't last for long, as my father soon lost the office job that was sustaining him at the time and our family at the time. This obviously didn't sit well with my mom at the time, and she was vehemently protesting against my father always, and nonchalantly providing for his parents when he obviously had a family to take care of, and also when they were causing him to deteriorate in life rather than to be elevated. And this, the next thing my mother could have forced my father to resort to, was totally abandoning his parents and solely focusing on his family. And to their unknowing surprise, my grandparents were able to kickstart their business with the introduction of a new recipe to their repertoire. This caused the stocks in their company to quite literally skyrocket, as their business that was formerly at the bottom of the barrel was now one of the leading, if not the leading, beverage manufacturers in the entire country. And they were even planning on going international. This was obviously a win for the family, and my grandparents felt really bad for the way that they'd been leeching off of their son and decided to make amends, and even tried on countless occasions to reach out to their son. But my mother was always blocking every single one of their efforts, as she had no idea what exactly they were reaching out for. And ever since then, they've had only futile attempts at trying to reconnect with their son and grandchildren. Apparently, it was only recently that my dad was finally able to contact them, and when they heard the news, they thought to formally invite one of their grandchildren over, and my dad found this as a great opportunity to let one of his grandchildren meet their grandparents. The whole issue was a shock to me, but it became even more than I can handle when my grandparents said that they wanted to leave the company to my father, as they didn't have much time left to spend in this life, and it was only right that my father was the one to inherit what they've worked their whole life for. Eventually, my grandparents were able to reach out to my parents through me, and when my mother found out what my grandparents had in mind for my father, I could visibly see the way she expunged all the negative feelings and conceptions of my grandparents, as she knew that with this, she was practically set for life. And this was the only time that I saw she was fully in support of whatever it was that my father wanted to do, as she knew she was at the very least entitled to a lot when things were fully resolved with my grandparents. But there was one thing she didn't think of, which was the fact that my grandparents were very cautious of the way they were planning on making my father inherit their fortune. So this is what they did. The premise of the entire company was based on the fact that the production of the products was dependent on the presence of the recipe that was a tightly guided item. And this was in the presence of none other than my grandfather. He even made sure that this didn't fall into the wrong hands. But I don't know why he gave it to me, of all people, and now of all times, but then he told me that I was going to know when to use it when the time came. I was still confused, as I didn't know what this meant, but I would soon find out. However, this was only years after we'd gotten back together with my father's parents. After quite a few lovely years, my grandparents eventually passed away when I was in my early 30s, and then the time came where we were to respect the final decisions made by my grandparents. My mother was not having it when she found out that not only was she not going to be receiving anything, but quite literally every single thing that my grandparents owned now belonged to my father. Outraged, she tried to spark up some form of debate revolting against the decision by saying that she spent her entire life building my father and that she was entitled to what she deserved. And even my siblings were on her side, making me the odd one out. It seemed like there was nothing I could do, as my mother was already set to filing for divorce, and she planned to take everything my father had. However, there was a twist to this. In the will, there was a clause where it stated that the entire rights and shares of the company can at any time go to the one individual who is in possession of the company's most guarded recipe. I only found this later, but just in time. And as my mother took my father to divorce court in order to take everything he had, she found out that not only was he without possession, but it all now belonged to me. And I was now in charge. Her and my siblings' whole demeanor changed as they knew what was going to happen now that the discarded son had gotten a hold of what they were after this entire time. They definitely got what was coming their way. And I don't feel a single shred of remorse for my actions, as they would have done the same. I don't know where in the world this is all taking place. I'm definitely assuming it's not the United States, especially considering OP said one of the biggest beverage makers in the country, considering going international. Unless your grandparent was John Coca-Cola or your grandma was Susan Pepsi, I don't think it's taking place in the United States. Although it would be kind of cool to be able to say that you literally are related to Dr. Pepper. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, don't be a jerk for no reason. I had issues with my former housemate. We were just two living in the apartment, but it got to a time when we could just not tolerate each other anymore. It was usually one issue to another, day in, day out. I finally decided to leave rather than renew my rent for the month. As I packed up my stuff, I didn't know where I was going to live. Neither did I have everything figured out. I just needed to get out of that house, and that was what I did. I needed to stay in a place on my own terms without feeling like I was being choked. Leaving behind the familiar walls of our jointly owned apartment, I set off to stay temporarily with some friends while I got myself sorted. They welcomed me with open arms, offering me a place to crash as I figured things out. It felt good to have their support as I embarked on this new journey, but it wasn't as easy as I had predicted. I got into the friend's apartment and I was ushered into the storage unit where I unloaded my boxes. Among all the things I unloaded was my bed set. It was a welcome idea, a relief to have a safe place to store my belongings while I searched for my own place. In the initial days that I stayed with Dave, we shared meals, watched movies, and laughed till our stomachs hurt, but I didn't want to kid myself into thinking I could stay there longer. It was a temporary arrangement, and I knew I needed to be out of his way before I overstayed my welcome, so I threw myself out and into the task of finding a job and scouring listings for potential apartments. Every day was filled with appointments and viewings as I searched for the perfect place to start this new chapter of my life. And through it all, my belongings remained safely stored away in my friend's apartment, patiently waiting for their return to use. Or so I thought. When I went back to Dave's place to get my stuff, I was surprised to find my bed set missing. It was strange to find out that it was missing. I couldn't believe it was gone. I asked my friend about it, hoping that maybe he'd moved it somewhere else. But he looked just as shocked as I was. And that's when my friend dropped a bombshell. They told me that downstairs a neighbor had taken it. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How could they just take my stuff like that? It didn't make any sense. I trusted my friends to keep my things safe even in my absence, and I never expected them to let something like this happen. That was the only reason why I was comfortable going in search of a place and leaving my things there. Plus, he didn't tell me that the entire building had access to the storage unit. I couldn't wrap my head around it as I stood there trying to process what I had just heard. It felt like a betrayal, like a slap in the face, and I began to recount every bad decision I'd made since deciding to leave my joint apartment with my previous roommate. The couple of days that I stayed with Dave, and even whenever I came to visit before that, I'd always been friendly with the neighbors, exchanging pleasantries in passing, but I never imagined they would stoop to stealing from me. As I walked away from my friend's apartment, a whirlwind of emotions swirled inside me. Anger, frustration, and a sense of injustice burned in my chest. I couldn't let them get away with this. I had to confront the neighbors and demand answers. It wasn't okay to take what didn't belong to them. It was not. I marched down the hallway to the neighbor's door, my heart pounding with every step. When they opened the door, I could hardly contain my frustration. I asked them straight up about my missing bed set, but they denied everything. They had the nerve to claim that it was a gift from their uncle. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could they lie so blatantly? My anger boiled over as I tried to reason with them, but they just brushed me off. Without another word, they slammed the door in my face, leaving me standing there feeling so angry and helpless. There was nothing I could actually do at that moment other than feel too many emotions coursing through my veins. It was like a punch to the gut. I had trusted these people and they had betrayed me. The injustice of it all made my blood boil. I wanted to scream, to lash out at them for their deceitful behavior. But instead, I was left standing there, seething with anger and frustration. As I walked away from their door, I felt a sense of defeat wash over me. They had won this round, and there was nothing I could do about it. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't let them get away with it. I had to find a way to make things right, to reclaim what was rightfully mine. To be honest, it wasn't that the bed set was anything special. To me, it didn't hold any sentimental value. It just felt really unfair to steal from me and lie to my face about it because they were sure I wouldn't do anything about their actions. It didn't sit right with me on the inside. Feeling frustrated and betrayed after the confrontation with the neighbors, I knew I had to take action. I turned to my friend's apartment to inform him of the scenario that I, unfortunately, had to witness and check if he had any advice on how I could go about the whole thing. I was hoping that he would at the very least have a way or help me figure out a way to get back at the neighbors for taking my bed set. As we sat down to talk, my friend listened patiently as I recounted the events of the confrontation. He had some other friends over and they could all see how upset I was and offered their support. Then my friend mentioned something that caught my attention, the neighbor's car. I asked if there was anything that they took to be important that I could mess with, and he said he had no idea. He also said that one of the few things that he could make out from a distance was the excessive care they gave to their car. He didn't know which of the occupants owned the car, but they jointly adored the car. I mean, anyone would. I'd seen the car parked by the road before on one of the days I came over to see Dave. I remember admiring the car, so I could understand why they would dote on the vehicle like one doting on a child. Suddenly, a plan began to form in my mind. I knew that revenge wasn't the answer, but the injustice of the situation fueled my anger and I couldn't let them get away with it. I was determined to make them pay for what they had done. As I sat in my friend's apartment, my mind raced with possibilities. How could I make them regret taking my bed set? What could I do to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget? With each passing moment, my plan became clearer. Fueled by my sense of injustice and anger, I decided to gather more information about the car and everything there was to know about it. I watched from a distance as they came and went, taking note of the make and model of their vehicle. I even went as far to check if their car doors were unlocked, and to my surprise, they were. Twice. On 2 different occasions, I decided to casually check if the doors were locked, and both times, I was shocked to see them unlocked. In all of my planning and snooping around, I knew I had to be careful though. I didn't want to stoop to their level or cause any real harm. I mean, bodily harm. But I was determined to make them feel the same sense of frustration and helplessness that I had felt. Surprisingly, Dave did nothing to stop me, even though he knew exactly what I wanted to do. All he had to say was, "They had it coming," and "do what you see fit." But before I did anything, I was sure to ensure that a lot of time had passed before I finally got back at them for what they did. More importantly, it was enough time to get them to apologize or at least return the bed set they had stolen from him. But as it turned out eventually, they were neither apologetic about stealing what does not belong to them, nor were they keen on restituting the stolen property that was in their apartment. So I decided to put my action to work. Everything was in place, but I knew for certain that I could not act during the day. There was something about the night that made it better for doing things that you did not want to be traced back to you. So what did I do? I waited in Dave's place through the day. I got off work earlier and branched in the store to get groceries. I got all I needed for my plan and went straight to Dave's place. The good thing was that they were home equipments, so no one would suspect that I had an evil intent with the things I carried into his house. Right. When the darkness was pretty much deceiving enough, I snuck out of my friend's apartment and I made my way to the neighbor's car with my heart pounding within my chest. As I approached the car, I couldn't believe my luck. the doors were unlocked. Again. I knew the bulk of my plan rested on the car being unlocked, but I couldn't say with certainty that it would be. Alas, it was, and with a silent prayer of thanks, I slipped inside, careful not to make a sound. The first thing I picked from my bag of groceries was the motor oil I removed from Dave's room. Then I began to pour a generous amount like they tell us to do in those skincare products ads. I was extremely generous with applying the product on every surface of the car's interior. I made sure to cover everything, the seats, the dashboard, even the floor mats. With each pour, my sense of satisfaction grew. It wasn't that the smell of the oil was bad in itself, it was that it would make everything smell wrong. Plus, the grease being everywhere would be an absolute pain in the butt. Then there would be the cost of cleaning too. Once the interior of the car was coated with the motor oil, I could have stopped there, but that seemed like an easy way to revenge. I wasn't done yet. I reached for the carton of milk I'd brought with me and carefully poured it into the car's vents. As the milk seeped into the vents, I knew that it would cause damage and create a foul odor that would linger for days even if they take the car to a wash. There was absolutely no way to get the smell completely off that very day. It was the perfect way to teach them a lesson, to make them regret ever crossing me. Only problem was that they would not know it was my doing. When I was done, I quietly slipped out of the car and made my way back to my friend's apartment. I heard them curse through their teeth the next morning, but they were never bold enough to ask or accuse my friend about the atrocity that was done to their car. Now, I'm not saying that I would ever be bold enough to try to do any kind of revenge like this, but I feel like if I were, I would be like hyper analyzing every detail of it to make sure that it could be not traced back to me at all. Like I'd be looking for like oversized shoes so even like shoe prints can't be traced back to me. I would want to like practically bubble wrap myself just so there's no like shred of anything being left behind. That said, our next story is, stepmom cheats on my dad, so I humiliate her at work. When a man marries a girl half his age, it's expected that there would be some sort of consequences in a union like that. I mean, I expected it. I knew it was only a matter of time before my dad's new sweetheart, Chelsea, 29-year-old female, messes up. He would have seen it too if he wasn't so blinded by how sexually attractive she was. That was the problem with my father. He was far more into the superficial details of a person than what they are inside. That's why he and my mom split up, of course. He wanted more, far more than she could give. Growing up, we didn't have much. My dad was a lawyer at some small firm in the city and he wasn't getting a lot of money. Thinking about it now, those times were the peak of my happy memories as a child. You see, my mom wasn't very materialistic. She fell in love with my dad when they were both in college. They both didn't have a lot, but that was enough for my mom, as long as they had each other. When my dad got a job in the law firm as a junior associate, mom got pregnant with me so she couldn't work. She stayed home to keep the house while dad worked. After I was born, she tried getting a job, but the economy was going through a tough time and nothing was turning up. Eventually, she stopped trying and decided to take care of me till I was old enough to start going to school. This story might seem like a drag, but it's important for you to know how much my mom sacrificed for our family, how good of a woman she was, and how my dad let her down. When I grew older and got to middle school, things still weren't looking up for my dad. Sure, he got promoted, but his salary still wasn't enough for us to get a house of our own, which had always been his dream. Eventually, my dad made some investment decisions. As he used to tell the story, he heard about a new tech company from his friend at work. They had just launched and my dad was advised to get in at the ground floor. He did that with his entire life savings at the time. It was a gamble, but it paid off big time. Dad's profits amounted to millions, which he used to start his own law firm. The floodgates were open and he started raking money in. We moved to not just some suburban house, but a mansion in the expensive part of town. I even changed schools to one of those elite society private schools. I hated it, of course, but that was what my dad wanted for me. You must have all heard the saying, much is hidden in poverty. It's true. After my dad started making so much money, he became a completely different person. He started to work late instead of spending time with his family. He always had somewhere to travel to or a business client to see. He was never around. I was finishing high school then, and I was there to see how everything unfolded. Mom always made excuses for him. Whenever I tried to fault him for being absent or something, she always told me to cut him some slack. They had come a long way by then, and she always tried to rationalize his actions. It wasn't easy coming from nothing and finally having what you want. The fear of losing it all creeps in sometimes, which makes people work twice as hard to keep it. Her explanation made sense, but it didn't stop me from resenting him any less. Just before I got into college, my parents sat me down and told me that they were getting a divorce. That news gave me the worst shock of my life till date. It was crazy because I never expected anything like that. I thought they were doing fine, but apparently they weren't. By that time, the deed was already finalized, and Mom, who had refused to take the house, was set to move to the suburbs. I finally got my mom to open up about what happened, and she told me that she had caught my dad cheating on her with some other woman. She got the tip from her friend, who worked at a high-end hotel and had seen my dad there with some other woman. Mom decided to follow him one time and discovered that Dad had been lying about his business meetings. It was just an avenue to see his mistress. This turn of events hurt my mom so much that she fell into a deep depression. She died during my 3rd year of college. I didn't talk to my dad for the entire time I was in college, and even when I went to law school. He tried to reach out several times, but I had no interest in talking to the one person who destroyed my family. But when I graduated from law school, he found a way to set up a meeting in a way I couldn't refuse. He wanted to apologize about what he did to our family. I finally agreed to accept his apology after he offered me a position as an associate in his law firm. It's important to mention that a few years back, he got married to the woman he cheated on my mom with. He actually sent me an invite to the wedding, but I never attended. Now that we worked together, he wanted me to meet her, especially because she worked in the firm as one of the senior associates. I declined his requests countless times, but he never stopped asking. Eventually, I decided to give in and meet her. We had dinner in his house, which used to be our family home. The first thing that shocked me was that his new wife, let's call her Chelsea, was young. She looked just a few years older than me and at least half of the age of my dad. She was beautiful, of course, and it was evident that that was why my dad got together with her. The second shock I received was during dinner. I was trying to be nice and hold a conversation with Chelsea, especially about how she got the position of senior associate in the firm. There, I learned that she got it through my dad's help. She was just a paralegal when she got to the firm, but my dad helped her through college and law school. She graduated just a year before me, and he'd already made her a senior associate. This meant that he had been cheating on my mom a long time ago, long before she found out. I was so pissed that I wanted to quit my job and completely cut ties with my father, but he begged me to stay. He said he wanted me to get into the business for a few years before making me partner. It was a great opportunity, and even though I hated my dad's guts, it was too good to pass up. I decided to remain civil with him and work in the company. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a few things about my dad's wife, Chelsea. I knew she was young, and so she was going to be a bit more hip and outgoing than my dad, but she was more than that. She was all over the place. Most of her friends in the office were guys, and they were a bit too friendly with someone who was married to their boss. One other thing I noticed about Chelsea was her mode of dressing. In my opinion, they were a little too provocative for a workplace, but since my dad and everyone else failed to mention it, I decided not to say anything. One day while I was working, Chelsea came into my office to talk to me. I didn't want to read too much into it at the time, but it was very obvious that she was flirting with me. She was asking me weird questions like, do I have a girlfriend, and how long it had been since I'd last got laid. I thought she had some weird father and son fetish, and I told her off immediately. She played it off as a joke, but I decided to keep an eye on her from that moment on. Another time at the office, I was talking to one of the guys at work. His name was Darren, 27-year-old male, and he was also a junior associate. I've forgotten what we were talking about, but it led to the talks of Chelsea. I asked him what he thought about her, and he said he thought she was dating someone else in the office instead of my dad. I asked him why he said so, and he explained that she was really close with some guy in the office named Jamie, 33-year-old male. Jamie was also a paralegal, and since we work on different floors, I didn't get to see him much before that day. But after my talk with Darren, I decided to look into the thing with Jamie. At that point, I didn't have a concrete reason to be suspicious, but my gut told me that Chelsea was hiding something, and I wanted to find out what it was. Soon enough, I realized that Darren was right. Chelsea hanged out with Jamie every day, even though they worked on different floors. They were too intimate to be formal friends, so I came up with a way to confirm my suspicions. I called one of my friends from high school. He knew how to fix cameras, and I told him to fix one in all the places they usually hung out. One in her office, one in his, another in the cabinet store, and even the toilets. They were spy cameras, so they weren't easy to spot. We installed them after the closing day at work when everyone had gone home, and I synced it to my computer. I spent days watching them. I also tailed her every day after work to see where she went to and if she met up with Jamie. I didn't get any evidence of them meeting up after work hours, and even during work I wasn't getting anything at first. I was just about ready to give up when one day they met up in one of the restrooms and went at it like a bunch of rabbits. I couldn't believe it. She was cheating on my dad right in his company with one of his workers. I wanted to feel sorry for my dad, but I couldn't. Everything he got, he deserved it. I had a good mind to turn off the laptop and pretend like I didn't see what I saw. But my dad was still my dad. I had a responsibility to protect him, so I took the video into a flash drive and went home. I wanted to give my dad the video and let him get heartbroken in private, but then I decided otherwise. He humiliated my mom, abandoned her, and made her go into a deep depression, which ultimately caused her sickness and death. If anything, that was my chance to get back at him by humiliating him in front of all his employees while proving that Chelsea was a cheat. It was a win-win situation. So one Monday, before a scheduled conference meeting, I connected my laptop to the projector. When it was time for Chelsea to make a presentation, I played the video of her and Jamie. I can still remember the shock on my dad's face as he stared at the projector. It was priceless. For a moment there, I thought he was having a stroke or a heart attack or something. All I could do was laugh. They got divorced, and my dad got depressed. He didn't show up to his firm for over a month. It's still a bit funny to me. You got someone by cheating on your wife, and then you expected loyalty from that same person. It's just weird. Anyways, Chelsea and Jamie got fired for misconduct. Though they tried to sue the firm for having a camera in the bathroom, but we paid off some janitor to take the fall, so we weren't affected. Chelsea and Jamie eventually walked away with nothing. I mean, honestly, aren't most situations like this kind of in this avenue anyways? What I mean by that is some older guy with millions who gets married to some person half their age. Like, aren't they kind of going around and doing whatever they want while also spending that person's money, and when they've got to, making appearances as their wife? I mean, I remember hearing scandals of old rich guys who were exposed as racists, and the comments from those racist guys were literally about how, like, their half their age or even younger wife could sleep around with those people but couldn't bring them around. I mean, it was extremely appalling stuff, but it was kind of especially sad to realize even though obviously the relationship was always about the money, it's also on that level regardless. And at the same time, if you cheat on somebody with another person, how do you really have the confidence that the person you cheated with is not going to just at some point cheat on you when their next fling or next ideal person comes along? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.